Good evening. I'm Dr. Manish Dabhade, founder of the Indian Futures, and I welcome you all on behalf of the Indian Futures to this very timely and urgent panel discussion dealing with Trump mapping pathways ahead. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in 2025, this year, January, he did not merely resume where he left office in 2021. He came back with greater conviction, fewer restraints, and a sharper instinct for disruption. The return of the Trump doctrine, with its hallmarks of transactionalism, strategic unpredictability, and unilateralism, has again challenged many global assumptions, and Indian diplomacy is being tested afresh. India today finds itself at a very complex intersection. On the one hand, our ties with the United States continue to deepen. The Indo-US relationship, matured over 2 decades and elevated through successive administrations, has achieved a comprehensive strategic character, encompassing defense interoperability, critical technologies, maritime cooperation, and of course, very importantly, a shared vision of a free, open, and rules-based Indo-Pacific. On the other hand, we are witnessing renewed headwinds. Since Jan 2025, several structural trends have re-emerged or in fact intensified. First and foremost, a return to tariff brinkmanship, with the Trump administration threatening punitive trade measures against many Indian exports. Secondly, the resurrection of America First industrial policy, which has clear implications for global supply chains and Indian startups aligned with US markets. Importantly, also an increasingly personalized, very personalized foreign policy style, which sidelines institutional channels, many would argue, in favor of ad hoc leader level engagement. Operation Sindoor and the supposed role of Trump in ceasefire and overtures later to Pakistan, including hosting the Field Marshal Asim Munir in the White House, is the most glaring example of the singular challenge of dealing with Trump. Moreover, the emerging uncertainty around US commitments in the Indo-Pacific, especially in the light of Trump's transactional overtures towards both Russia and China, complicates India's strategic calculus in many ways. We are left asking whether the US under Trump 2.0 will remain a reliable Indo-Pacific partner or gradually retreat into selective engagement driven by immediate political returns and concerns. So, as India stands firm on strategic autonomy, yet leans towards deeper alignment with the US on multiple fronts, from semiconductors to clean tech, from defense production to space collaboration, the central question is now, how does New Delhi navigate the turbulence of Trump 2.0? How do we preserve the foundational gains of the last 2 decades while adapting to a re-emerging era of volatility, strategic hedging, and American unpredictability? And tonight's panel is uniquely placed to help us reflect and maybe chart possible pathways. Professor Amitabh Mattoo, to begin with, is the Dean of the School of International Studies and really a guiding voice in India's strategic discourse, whose work has consistently bridged academic insight and policy relevance. We're extremely fortunate to have joined by Ms. Seema Sirohi from Washington, D.C., who's really one of the respected Indian voices in Washington, whose deep understanding of US domestic politics and foreign policy sharpens our reading of the Trump era. Dhruv Shankar is really one of the stars now on India's foreign policy. He is the executive director of ORF America, and his scholarship spans the Indo-Pacific, technology, diplomacy, and strategic affairs. Together, we will unpack the core dilemmas and diplomatic options before India as it deals with an erratic but indispensable partner, no doubt. At the Indian Futures, we believe that it is not enough to merely respond to disruption. We must anticipate it, analyze it, and in some ways prepare strategic options grounded in India's national interests. With that, I now invite our distinguished panel to begin what promises to be surely a stimulating and forward-looking conversation. May I now invite Ms. Seema Sirohi to make her opening remarks, please?
Thank you, Professor Dabhade, and good evening to everyone. Greetings, Professor Mattoo. Hello, Dhruva. I'll try first to sort of paint a broad picture to give you a sense of things. The second Trump administration is proving to be a challenge not just for India, but for all countries, friends and foes alike. The first point is that Trump 2.0 is very different from Trump 1.0. World leaders have taken a bit of time to sort of understand that. Um, and because it's more unpredictable, less structured, and you could even call it chaotic. It has fewer domain experts than the first time around, which can lead to mischief or just bad judgments. Um, Trump is more empowered this time around and more determined to get his way, as you pointed out yourself, whether it's on trade or how much the allies should spend on defense. Second, he has complete control over the Republican Party. Very few Republican members of Congress dare defy him. The cabinet is full of loyalists. They sing the same song, no matter how different their positions might have been before. So, take, for example, America's top diplomat, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He has changed his position, especially on Russia, to align with Trump's. And same goes for other top officials. Primarily, they seem to be looking out for their own political survival. Major decisions are made by Trump and Trump's inner circle, which includes his sons and perhaps the vice president. Trump is also responsive to his support base. A couple of MAGA, the Make America Great Again movement, couple of their influencers exercise enough power to force the purge of officials they don't like. Third, trade and tariffs are Trump's top obsessions. He believes that other countries for decades have taken advantage of the US, and he's going to fix that. Thus, the daily threats of tariffs against countries from the smallest to the biggest, from Bosnia to Myanmar to the European Union and China. You could look at the tariff threats as a national security tool. Tariffs are the new sanctions, I would say. Fourth, Trump's China policy is unfolding at multiple levels, which makes it very hard for other countries to fashion their own policies. It's not clear whether he considers China as a rival or a potential friend or something in between. So, how does India deal with this scenario and make inroads? First rule, stay calm and carry on. Duck the bodyline bowling if you can. Keep your eyes on the long-term trajectory. In other words, ride it out. Remember that India was rather successful in Trump 1.0. It made progress and expanded almost all aspects of the relationship. But Trump 2.0 is posing unique challenges. On the positive side, India's decision to engage early with the Prime Minister's visit in February was wise. It produced a solid joint statement on which the two systems can continue to engage. Things achieved in the Biden administration were preserved, especially on technology cooperation and defense cooperation. And despite all the problems after the Pahalgam terrorist attack and Trump's insistence on equating India and Pakistan, the two sides, that is India and the US, continue to engage with each other. Meetings are taking place, decisions are being made. The Quad foreign ministers had a substantive meeting just recently, and a leaders' summit is going to take place in India later this year. And when Minister Jaishankar was here, besides meeting his counterpart, Secretary Rubio, he also met the Defense Secretary, the FBI Director, the Director of National Intelligence. So, the engagement is across the board and things are happening. Trade talks are on as we speak, and interim trade deal is expected to be announced soon, and that would be a big plus. I like to call all this the normal layer below the abnormal. But on the negative side, Trump's fascination for Pakistan, for which there are several reasons we can go into later, has created political difficulties for Delhi. India seemed a bit unprepared for this googly by Trump. Why? I think India doesn't seem to have a connection to Trump's inner circle, which Pakistan appears to have. Pakistan opened itself to uh, Donald Trump Jr., who's a big voice in the inner circle, for mining opportunities, for cryptocurrency, and whatnot. India so far doesn't seem to have a high-powered voice whispering in Trump's ear, but it could change. So let's see. Because I think you need to deal with political difficulties with political tools. Indian diplomats can't fix these kind of problems. You also need someone to champion the relationship. But in Trump 2.0, no country has a champion. It's Trump himself who champions or doesn't. So he was, very favorable to Russia until recently. You could argue that he's been promoting Pakistan in some ways, raising its status by inviting the army chief to a White House lunch. We shall see how long that lasts. Another problem looming over the relationship right now is Senator Lindsey Graham's bill, which says that the US will impose 500% tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil and gas. The bill does have a provision for Trump to give waivers, so we shall see where the bill goes. A new version is being sort of crafted right now, and it might expand Trump's ability to give more waivers and for a longer time. Right now, the waiver authority is for 180 days. And also, we have to remember that, America itself buys certain products from Russia. Another challenge is a certain amount of hostility towards Indian Americans and Indians in general among the MAGA crowd. There's deep resentment of people who come on H-1B visas, and that's a challenge. But Trump himself seems to appreciate the need for these visas. But the biggest puzzle for India might be Trump's China policy. It's full of confusing signals. It's evolving. Different things are happening at different levels. There are export controls and pressure on major universities to end their cooperation with China and curtail their relations. In red states, there are moves to sort of block China from buying federal land, etc., etc. In the end, overall, I remain optimistic. I think the relationship will survive very well and may strengthen because geopolitical logic would dictate that. The first year in this administration is about fulfilling campaign promises and showing results. The midterm elections are, increasingly on the White House's mind. So once that's over, things might get a little more normal. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Seema ji. I think you really gave a comprehensive sort of flavor of what is really brewing between India and US since Trump assumed office. But I think the most important point, which I mean, there are two points which you talked about was, I mean, obviously the Indian approach should be really stay calm and carry on and really look at the long-term trajectory. And the second point, obviously, was I think very importantly, which we should also, I mean, understand is continuity from Biden years in terms of technology and defense cooperation that seems to continue unabated despite Trump's, I mean, fascination for tariffs and everything. So, thank you so much. With this, I now invite Dhruva to make his opening remarks.
Thank you. It's always wonderful to be joined on the panel by two, people I know well and people I admire, Professor Mattoo and Seema, and thank you for inviting me to this. There's, and nothing to object to. I think Seema provided a very nice overview of everything that is at play. What I thought I would do, at the risk of some repetition, is just sort of, I think, provide a little bit of a sort of structure to how to think about some of the very issues that Seema brought up, and perhaps just for the benefit of people who are trying to analyze what is obviously a complex and fast moving situation, that I hope this can be useful. Let me start with the late Trump, early Biden years, where the US-India relationship was actually in a relatively good place at that point of time. People forget that Trump's last visit of his first term anywhere abroad was to India, because a few weeks later, in fact, we had the outbreak in the US of the COVID pandemic, and that prevented international travel. So India was his last destination. He had a relatively successful visit at that time, and left with a sort of somewhat positive impression. And then we went into sort of lockdown mode for a while. You had a U.S. election. The Biden administration, to their credit, came in, and one of the first things they did was actually engagement with India. Not just India, if not exclusively, but it was towards the higher end of the priority list in a way that prior U.S. presidencies had not. Often they turned their attention to India towards the tail end of their tenures, whether it was Clinton or George W. Bush in his second term, or Obama. So we really saw, in some ways, the Biden administration starting off by elevating the Quad, doing a lot of bilateral engagements with India at a high level, and also providing some structure to the relationship. So you had the establishment and elevation of a 2+2 dialogue, the Quad, and ISET, which was a strategic technology dialogue led by the National Security Advisors. So the first 3 years, I feel, of the Biden administration, perhaps we will look back on as years that were really quite positive for the bilateral relationship, very substantive, culminating, I think, in two things. One was Prime Minister Modi's state visit in the summer of 2023 to the US, where there were a number of major and very discrete agreements that were agreed to, including the Artemis Accords. We just had an Indian astronaut go into space with NASA as a consequence of that. Some very important developments on the defense side as well, including defense technology agreements, and other things that were concluded in that state visit. And then a few months later, President Biden came to India for the G20 summit, again, where you had the launch of IMEC and many other quite substantive outcomes. Now, the last year or so of the Biden administration got, in some ways, colored by a number of developments. One was the Khalistan issue, and particularly the Canada-India spat, and the U.S. finding itself somewhat caught between preserving its relationship, very close relationship with Canada, and also its partnership with India on the one hand, but trying to navigate that certainly colored the relationship. The second was Bangladesh and the change in government there, and the perception in India that the US and India were effectively on opposite sides of the political divide in Bangladesh, and that some of US actions were certainly not constructive or helpful from India's point of view. There were a few other issues as well, more minor irritants that came up, but these were some things that certainly colored that relationship. And there was a belief in many quarters in India that a Trump administration would care less about those issues, and it would be an opportunity in some ways to turn the page on this and have a more constructive relationship. Now, the first few months of the second Trump administration seemed to reinforce that view. You had, as Seema mentioned, a relatively successful and substantive visit by Prime Minister Modi in February of this year. By the standards of the Trump administration, very normal and controversy-free visit. Even some of the issues that many feared would become problematic, issues on immigration and trade, including tariffs, while not optimal from India's point of view, India was certainly less negatively affected than many feared. In fact, it was some of those issues were managed. There was some controversy about the deportation flights to India, obviously, of undocumented migrants. And then also on the tariff issue, India was, of course, affected by the Liberation Day tariffs, but less so than many had feared, and less so than had it been strict reciprocal tariffs. And so there was a feeling that India had gotten off relatively lightly. There were carve-outs made, for example, for pharmaceutical exports, amongst other things. Again, all of this meant that until May of this year, things were going, again, relatively speaking, quite well for India compared to a lot of the turmoil that in the US's relationships with Europe, with Ukraine, and even with some allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific. Now, things got a little bit off the rails during Operation Sindoor. Now, initially, just to quickly recap, the first few days, the US was actually quite supportive of India. Vice President J.D. Vance happened to be in India during the Pahalgam terrorist attack. When India did, on May 7th, the strikes in Pakistan, again, the US did not condemn those strikes. In fact, the United Nations tried to move some language that was quite condemnatory of terrorism emanating from Pakistan, which was blocked by China, amongst others. Things, of course, went a little haywire on May 10th, the day the conflict in some ways stopped, with President Trump claiming credit for the ceasefire, India insisting that the US did not have a role, and that this was largely as a result of India's strikes on Pakistani targets, that Pakistan's DGMO gave a call to his counterpart to suggest a cessation of hostilities. And the other thing I think that made it worse was this idea that this was tweeted by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, that India had agreed, and India insisted did not agree to this, to wide-ranging third-party talks in a third country, neutral third country with Pakistan on a wide range of issues. This is Pakistan's talking point. Pakistan has been asking for this for some time. And then to add to all of that, a few weeks later, the visit of General Munir from Pakistan to the US, his meeting at the White House and such. So all of this suddenly turned this, gave this sense that the US had, if at the very least, been neutral on this. In some areas, even seemed to support Pakistan's longstanding calls for mediation, third-party mediation between India and Pakistan, and in some ways gave Pakistan a bit of a way out. Now, that has led to a very understandable frustration in India, and on something that India naturally sees as a very sensitive issue, and Trump's handling of it has not been appreciated and has certainly colored the attitudes to the relationship. So I think a few things, just to provide some context. I think part of the challenge in all of this is that we're seeing in some ways three parallel debates underway in the US on policy in the Trump administration. And this is what makes it very difficult to analyze. One is, I think, a broad foreign policy and national security debate involving three camps. One is a real more isolationist camp embodied by people like Donald Trump Jr., J.D. Vance to some degree, many others in the administration, who believe that the US should take less of a role in international affairs and international conflict. A second is there is a sort of a view that the US is in a structural competition with China, that it must reallocate resources in the Indo-Pacific. And that particularly this is targeting Europe, and they see Europe as free riders, and that Europe should take charge of its own security. They don't see Russia as much of a threat. And then there's a third, more conventional sort of hawkish view of on China, Iran, Russia, that remains, particularly in the bureaucracy, in the military, in certain Republican circles in Congress, that remains there, although on the back foot at this point of time. And you see a constant jostling between these three worldviews playing out at different, certain times it seems like the so-called isolationists are were more ascendant, but then we saw strikes on Iran, which many of them have criticized subsequently. So there's that debate going on. There's a second debate on economic issues, which in some ways is running almost independently. So again, you have true trade hawks who supported tariffs on everybody, hence the Liberation Day tariffs. You have some who see China as more of a problem, and that economic competition needs to be focused more on China. You have those who are sort of still traditional free market. The US should normalize relations with China because of the domestic economy. And supply chains, people like Elon Musk, and there's certain senators in the U.S. Senate who are still advocating for that. And there are others who believe that there should be more of a high technology competition, and that the U.S. should not really focus on industrial competition. So again, you have these mixed views playing out there. Which shapes, I think, some of the confusion that perceived confusion that we see that Seema correctly described on China policy. And today, last couple of days, we've seen, for example, a lifting of some controls on chips, on AI chips to China. Lastly, I think there's a debate going on in Trump's own mind, and this involves his personal legacy, his family, his business considerations. And this is, I think, where the part I think people underestimated a lot of times is Trump seems to genuinely believe that he is a peacemaker, and he wants his legacy to be that of a peacemaker. He said that in his inauguration speech in January. And this played out again in his Ukraine policy, although, again, frustrations are starting to bubble up with Russia. It's playing out in his Middle East policy. And even when Israel and Iran, when the US struck Iran, he spoke about that now there needs to be peace between Israel and Iran, and these countries have to stop fighting each other. So that seems to have been in part to what was at play, his frustrations with his peacemaking abilities not going anywhere in Ukraine and in Gaza. Meant that in India and Pakistan, he saw this as an opportunity to claim credit for bringing about peace between two nuclear powers, and this is how he seems to genuinely believe the events occurred. And India disputing that version of events has not played favorably with him. So I think that idea of Trump as a peacemaker has been somewhat underestimated over the past 6 months. But again, he's also at the same time realizing the limitations of his approach, that this requires other actors they have a say in this matter, whether it's China, Russia, Iran, in the issues he cares more about with the US, but even on India and Pakistan as well. So I think that's where it is. One final thing on this, I think, clearly looking forward, I would say two things. One, in some ways, the India-US relationship is on track, but the relationship with Trump is not. And I think it'll be interesting going forward to see to what degree you can distinguish between this, because in many of the other working level meetings and stuff, there is a very cooperative atmosphere. There is a let's do business. There is a kind of business as usual almost approach to things. But certainly the political logic has been colored, the political atmosphere, and this was again evident when Prime Minister Modi, in the readout of Prime Minister Modi's telephone call with President Trump after the G7 meeting. They were supposed to meet in person in Canada, and Trump's early departure prevented that. So I think that will be something to sort of distinguish. The second is that sort of Pakistan is clearly back in play to some degree in Washington after a few years, really since the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, where it did not have a lot of, it did not get a lot of attention. It was not really, it was on the margins in some ways in US policy. And Seema mentioned some of the reasons why that is the case. I'd add a few more. Even before May 7th, Pakistan had started playing, from the US point of view, a more constructive role on counterterrorism. And they handed over, for example, the Abbey Gate bomber, who was responsible for US military deaths in Kabul. And that you saw even people who were very skeptical of Pakistan and the US establishment had to grudgingly say, they were helpful in this regard. So there had been an attempt to, there's some reports again of Pakistan providing overflight for drones, counterterrorism drones for intelligence gathering and such. So I wouldn't say it's gone back to the the Afghanistan war era, because the Pakistan is not needed to the same degree by the US, but certainly they've tried to find ways to make themselves useful on the counterterrorism front. There are the sort of business dealings as well, questions of potential cryptocurrency deals and mining deals. Again, we'll see how much of that really is viable. Another factor is the Pakistan seems to have convinced certain actors that it will be useful in Iran-related contingencies as well. And so the flare-up between Israel and Iran also proved an opportunity for Pakistan to make itself relevant once again. So I think there are a few of these issues that have come up. Again, structurally, just given the weaknesses in Pakistan's economy, there are question marks going forward as to to what degree. Again, I suspect so far it would not be go back to the period of the early 2000s, or where Pakistan was a much more active player. But clearly there is a certain resumption of that. Let me end on this note. I think, how do we navigate this going forward? I think, again, distinguishing sometimes between what are fruitful, constructive areas of cooperation and dialogue between the US and India. I would say four stand out, which are potentially defense, energy, technology, and trade. And again, if there can be some sort of forward progress from India's point of view on these issues, that should, that there should be an ability to seize those opportunities. The other trick, I think, will be how India can express its dissatisfaction with Trump's approach to India and Pakistan in recent months, without, in some ways, sort of hurting its own equities. And so, there's nothing I think Pakistan would like more than for India to cancel contracts with the US. Not on the merits of that contract, or the economic or the technological merits of that contract, but purely to send a political point. And that's the kind of thing that would be welcomed, I imagine, in Rawalpindi. So I think those are some of the things that would be interesting to see how that can be navigated in the months ahead. But again, we're in a very strange world where certainly the political flavor has changed since May and after early May of this year. The question is this a bump in the road? How big a bump? Or will this lead to more consequential shifts in India's approach to the US over the next 3 years? But at the same time, it seems like in many areas, as I mentioned, trade, we've seen less on the defense side, but trade, tech, energy, there's a lot of more business as usual. So again, I would end in the same spot as Seema, which is, I think overall, I'd say we were in for some improvements in the relationship, but certainly we'll have these difficulties will have to be navigated. Thank you.
Thanks, Dhruva. I think you really pointed out to some very interesting. You had a very interesting take, especially on how Biden years. You talked about how there was a substantive and really positive trajectory in India-US relations. Obviously, the real hump in that sense came with Operation Sindoor, and I specifically liked, I think, putting out really those internal debates on foreign policy, national security, economic issues, and I think we really underestimate in India how Trump is looking at the real legacy sort of issues which are driving his policies vis-a-vis in the external domain. So fantastic, and I think the 4 points about convergence is possible, and maybe we'll get to that in the Q&A, possibly on defense, energy, technology, and trade. So thank you so much. I think these are really very sharp pointers to what sort of is again the state of play between India and Trump, not India and US in that sense. So great, thank you so much. And with this, I now invite Professor Mattoo to make his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Manish Dabhade, and namaskar and good evening to everyone in India, and good morning to both Seema ji and Dhruva. from in Washington in the Beltway. Um, I think both of them have given us a remarkable survey, both granular and overarching, about what's happening in Trump's America. If you remember, Manish, I think you may have actually organized a panel when Trump was elected in November. I think many in Washington and elsewhere were probably uncorking champagnes bottles. Some in South Block were reaching out for a bottle of Tylenol or Dolo, as is flavor these days. And in JNU, proverbially and characteristically, we were reaching out to Arthashastra, and because the first refuge of Indian scholars when you face chaos is philosophy. So, what I think both Dhruva and Seema have hinted towards is what we are witnessing is not a glitch. Trump 2.0 is not just a sequel, it's a system or a complete subversion of the system. A system that is recoding the global order, tweet by tweet, tariff by tariff. What I'll do really is offer three scenarios, not to prophesy doom. My internet is a little unstable because there's been a tree which has fallen on our Wi-Fi connection. So if you can't hear me, just point out and alert me. So let me offer you three scenarios in the time that I have, not to prophesy doom, but to perhaps deliberately provoke clarity. And I exaggerate these scenarios only so that we can, in some ways, in the best analytical sense, have an argument. And these are not certainly predictions, these are navigational charts. Three winds that could buffet India in the coming years, and with each, I'll suggest how India might sail, or if necessary, row in these turbulent waters. Select scenario one, which you are witnessing today as we speak, the tariff tsunami. President Trump has become the protectionist in chief, no longer constrained by electoral calculus in terms of winning the next election, but constrained by his own domestic constituency. He's lashing out blanket tariffs every day on Truth Social. We just wait with bated breath about what he's going to announce, invoking national interest, invoking
Professor Mattoo, we have lost you.
making America great again, with the constitutional.
Let me just get back to him.
I was asking you, where did you lose me? Did you lose me while I began, or can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We can absolutely hear you, and you can start from the first scenario. We lost you that long back.
Yeah, first scenario is Trump becoming the protectionist in chief, no longer constrained by the calculus of winning a new election. He lashes out blanket tariffs, which he's doing now. And if you just hope and pray in some ways that there is a deal done, but if a deal isn't done with India, not even a minimalist deal, then what are the options? Go to the WTO? That's just now a little small building in Geneva, because the tariffs are not often meant to negotiate, they're also meant to punish. He's talked about anyone buying oil from Russia will suddenly face punitive tariffs. What's the impact going to be? Indian exporters panic, supply chains stagger, the so called digital corridor, which Silicon Valley dims, and in Washington, trade becomes as it has already become, as you heard, a blood sport, with Trump keeping score on his golf carts. India's response. Oh dear, have I lost you again? Have I lost you? Can you hear me? Okay. India's response: you have to retool at home and recalibrate abroad. I think no matter what happens with America, you need to diversify your trade. More than a slogan, make India export competitive. And while negotiating with Trump's team, remember, they don't read white papers, they read headlines. So let's speak the language of leverage, not lament. If Trump plays poker, India must play bridge, slow, strategic, and ultimately winning. Now, this is not something that will happen instantly. This will require time and effort. And while you continue to engage with in the manner that both Seema and Dhruva pointed out, I think you need to recalibrate and focus at other partners and at home. Scenario two is the one which is a very personal story for most Indians or most middle class Indians, which is goodbye H1B. Because every Indian middle class family, I mean, I'm probably exaggerating given the size of our middle class, but still worth an exaggeration. Because every middle class Indian family knows someone whose dream was go to the US, get an H1B, buy a Subaru or a Lexus, depending on which or Japanese automobile manufacturer is your fancy. Maybe a condo in New Jersey. Seema, are you in DC or in New Jersey?
Um, I'm in DC.
Okay. And send hopefully dollars back home. But now that has become like a dream with a visa denial slip. I don't know the number of people who are being denied a visa to go on study in America, all those waiting for an H1B, just waiting. This is migration squeeze with a vengeance. And the skilled Indian is no longer the model immigrant. He or she is now just a job thief, the outsourcer, the soft target of hard politics. What's at stake? 4 million Indians in the United States, 120 billions in IT exports, and the invisible bridge between our democracies, the people, the diaspora, the, the great thread that united us. But again, let's not just cry foul. Let's ask what India can do. India's response. Can we turn that old cliche really into a reality? Turn this brain drain into a brain gain? Make India not just a place to stay, but a place to build and belong? Open up our own Silicon Valleys in Hyderabad and Pune. Look, I'm giving you the vision thing. I think you have got enough through Seema and Dhruva's presentations to be able to understand Trump's policy. But what can we do? Offer returning professionals.
We lost you again, Professor.
It's actually raining here in JNU.
Professionals, fellowships, labels, angel capital, and yes, less.
We have lost you, Professor Mattoo, again.
Sorry, was I beginning on the third scenario? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Where was I? You see, this is Trump's policies working quietly, preventing me from setting out the optimistic scenarios for self-reliant, diversified India. But anyway, I was looking, did I start scenario 3?
No, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, I said make India not just a place to stay, but a place to build and belong. Less bureaucracy, more for returning professionals. If US closes its doors, India must open its windows. And perhaps, just perhaps, Trump's visa crackdown is the best industrial policy that India never wrote. And the final third scenario is strategic solitude. And this is the most dangerous of them all. And we've talked about it, both Dhruva and Seema pointed out, because it's not economic, but existential. Imagine this. Another crisis flares on the line of control or in the international border. Pakistan mobilizes, India retaliates clinically, precisely as we did in Operation Sindoor. And where is Washington? Silent, or worse, moralizing both sides, or even worse, taking sides and not ours. Or a Galwan 2.0 happens with China, and Trump and the US administration is again silent, as we witness in the shadows of G2 light happening. This is strategic solitude. The US will turn out to be an unreliable partner, a partner that tweets about deterrence but disappears when diplomacy must be done. No hotline, no assurance, no hashtags. Now, this is not entirely new. In 71, that happened when the 7th Fleet sailed in, but albeit that we had the Soviet Union out there. But it's completely new in tone. Trump doesn't believe in alliances. He believes in transactions. And for the 20th time, as you heard, he repeated that he mediated between India and Pakistan to solve what could have potentially been a nuclear war by offering trade incentives. We are not seeing those incentives yet. Trump, there is no deal breaker, no loyalty, no liability. That's Trump's worldview. So what should India's response in this calamitous view be? We invest, and we invest in our own deterrence. Hard power that doesn't wait for a call from foggy bottom. We build partnerships with France, with Australia, re-engage with China, as the foreign minister is currently doing, quietly, but with a dynamism and a robustness which recognizes that America is retrenching or unreliable or both. And we must speak for ourselves, not through op-eds in foreign affairs, for which both Dhruva and Seema must be writing, but by showing the world that when India acts, it does so responsibly, proportionately, and with a single-minded sense of purpose. The lesson: don't ask, will the US stand with us? Ask, will we stand firm regardless? So finally, my dear friends, in each of these scenarios, whether it's the economic tariff threat or the skilled migration threat or the threat of US cozying up to Pakistan or Pakistan cozying up to US, mind you, Asif Munir was an army chief who visited Trump. We even had a young parliamentarian from Karnataka, just to get a sense of perspective, who met with Trump, Tejasvi Surya, at least that's what the gossip columns and newspapers report. He had a meeting one-on-one with President Trump. So even a young MP from India, if India gets its calculations right, can have one-on-one meetings with the President of the United States. But in each of these scenarios, India faces a test of maturity, of agility, and of resolve. My argument is Trump is not a storm we can wait out. He's a climate we must adapt to. Because the easy option is to believe that Trump is Trump, and once Trump goes, the system will go back to where it used to be. So what must guide us? Not flattery, not fury, but a strategic compass rooted in clarity. Clarity about our interests, clarity about our capabilities, clarity about our voice in the world. And let us remember, India is not a balancing pole in someone else's circus. We are, if we want to be a civilizational power with our own story to tell, with our own partnerships to build, and our own battles to fight. And as the dean of the School of International Studies, which the school which has studied international relations for 7 decades, let me say this, it's not the first time that India has been tested in the manner that it's being tested today by the United States. But if we remain confident, creative, and clear-eyed, this may well be the moment we come of age. That's more of a philosophical intervention into a very hard-nosed debate, but I hope it's appreciated for its normative vision, even if it doesn't quite follow the trajectory of operational realpolitik. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mattoo. So, as expected, you have injected a heavy dose of optimism in what we see as the Trump disruption, and what you started out by saying that it's really a complete subversion of the system. I don't know how many of us can go that far to explain what Trump is doing in US.
Not if you want to get a visa to the United
Yes, I guess.
States.
And yes, sir. And the three scenarios I think really point out the challenge for India. I think so. That's a really, I mean, as expected, extremely brilliant articulation. So with this, let me now open up for Q&A, and maybe I'm not sure we have enough time. So let me just put out a question for each of you, and I mean, and then you could respond, and maybe then see how much time we have, because we still have only 15 odd minutes. So let me start with Seema, and maybe what she can also reflect on what sort of India narrative is out there amongst, I mean, which was talked about also, especially you mentioned, MAGA is not that looking towards India and Indian Americans very favorably. So what exactly is the Indian narrative right now, which you think can be molded, and what sort of opportunities lie ahead for India?
In terms of the MAGA crowd, I'm not sure they're ready to accept, the great Indian story, which we've been party to or been selling for several years, that we have Indian American CEOs, Indians are hardworking, they fit in well, they don't make problems in companies, and they are just amazing workers. Now, that is not seen in the same way by those left behind. Trump's main appeal to the Americans left behind by the technology revolution, etc., is that he's going to bring manufacturing back and create those old jobs. Whether that's rooted in reality is another question. So I think changing the narrative is a very big task. I know that we can't highlight too much the success of Indian Americans, because that's going to, I think, boomerang, and that's going to hit a raw nerve. So you have to do it very intelligently. I mean, to Trump's credit, there are Indian Americans in the White House in important positions. So he himself is not necessarily badly inclined towards Indian Americans or their success. Changing the narrative in America about India is a bigger task. And that would depend on, again, political judgment in New Delhi, if they are indeed interested, or, as Professor Mattoo has pointed out, it's time for India to look inwards as America is looking inward, and strengthen itself, and, take on the world in a different way. I am not an expert on all this. I cannot judge, but all I know is India, for the time being, does need American technology, does need certain things from the United States that no other partner can provide on the scale that's needed. So I think, while I agree with Professor Mattoo that you have to strengthen yourself domestically, you must also maintain ties with countries that can provide you the fuel that is needed.
Yes, absolutely. Dhruva, I mean, I would really want you to, in fact, look back at the Foreign Affairs piece by Ashley Tellis, 2020, the surprising success of the US-Indian partnership. So, what really happened, and all of us have seen his extremely provocative piece in the Foreign Affairs. So, I mean, are we getting Trump? I mean, getting China wrong has been the common sort of I mean pronouncements in US. But have we in India now getting Trump wrong in some ways, and also going a bit further, also this whole question about tariffs. I mean, to what extent MAGA is now looking at, I mean, Trump taking on tariffs ahead with much vengeance, because it is ultimately going to affect the gas prices at the pump. It is also going to expect, I mean, it's also going to lead to increased costs of products. So how is that being, I mean, is there a sort of a review also being down the way at some level, which will give India some sort of a leeway ahead?
I'll defer on responding on Ashley Tellis's piece, partly because they asked me to write a response to it. So I'll have a response in writing coming out in a few weeks. I think it'll come out maybe by early September. So I'll wait for that. But I think the biggest issue there, the one I think glaring issue there is he seems to criticize India for not adopting an alliance type relationship with the US in the face of confrontation with China. And I think the big mistake there is the US is not offering India an alliance. I think we just sort of, the US has not offered a bilateral treaty alliance since the 1950s. It has a NATO expansion, but a new alliance is not on offer. And the idea, even before Trump, that the US was offering that and that something like that would be ratified by the US Congress is just unimaginable, politically impossible. And certainly at a time when Trump is trying to, disentangle the US from alliances with NATO, with Japan, with Korea, Australia, watering down its commitments, that is certainly off track. So this idea of criticizing India for not accepting an alliance that is not even on offer, I think, is a bit of a circular and misleading argument. But I'll leave that aside. I think let me just address quickly three things, which actually the three areas that Professor Mattoo brought up. And I'm a little bit more sanguine on all three, both for India. I think India has a stronger hand to deal with, but also I think just even reading the situation as it stands today, with the caveat that in a Trump-led world, things can change quite rapidly in some unexpected ways. So, if we were having this conversation a few months from now, things might look different. First, on trade. I think it is quite clear and has been clear for some time that the US sees itself as the big net importer in the world. If you just look at goods trade, the US has by far the largest current account deficit of any country. And I think Trump was onto something. And by the way, this continued in different vein under Biden even. Maybe even actually started under Obama, who didn't do any new trade deals in his first term. That the US offering more market access was no longer viable politically, nor was it even needed economically. In fact, the US remains quite an open market despite the Trump tariffs. But I think that it exposed the dissatisfaction with other economies. Initially, with the EU and Japan, we saw this flare up in the 1990s, for example, late 80s, early 90s with Japan, then with the European Union on agricultural tariffs, but then certainly with China. And this is really in response to the China shock. But Trump is now imposing these tariffs across the board. So the idea of the US as being non-reciprocal in terms of market access, I think that era has gone. And India needs to be prepared for that. And I think that is why we're seeing these trade and tariff negotiations. In some ways, it parallels what India is doing separately, regardless of Trump, with the UK. And even with the European Union, we're seeing a restart of trade talks. Until 2023, we had actually quite advanced trade talks with Canada as well. So I think this is, both a product both of a realization on India's part that you have to compete in a more global trading regime, but with select partners that also happen to be your strategic partners. But on the US side, also a recognition that door is not going to open any further. So that I hopefully we'll reach some deal now in the next few weeks between US and India. Seema, in fact, has an article about this. on the latest trade talks that are happening this week. But again, I think I'm a bit more sanguine on the trade front. And again, the numbers are quite positive. Goods trade has been growing quite handsomely over the past few years, again, even with minor bumps. On immigration, again, so far there hasn't been a crackdown in the second Trump administration on legal migration, not a major one. There has been suspension of some student visas, again, targeted against students who they see were involved in various political activities. That has led to a slight decline in Indian applications to US universities. So there is a bit of a deterrence effect. But so far, we're not seen a major suspension of any major program. Again, that could change anytime in the next few weeks or months or years. And partly, I think that reflects a reality that the Trump administration is facing, is that actually the labor market is quite tight in the US. Unemployment is quite low. Skilled migration, particularly in STEM, is needed. And therefore, again, they've continued so far with 3-year OPTs after H-1B, after F1, after student visas. H-4 program, I think, has not been suspended yet, although it might be. So there are certain, we haven't seen, again, a very radical shift in the legal migration regime. I think partly because there is that understanding that labor, including from India, is needed up to date, despite, again, the objections of certain people on the far right in the US. But again, that could change on a dime, and there are these competing concerns there. If the US wants to compete with China, it needs that talent and some of that talent will have to come from elsewhere. The third, and by the way, some people like Elon Musk and others have actually pushed for that. They have nothing. They say, there's nothing against legal migration. We should only focus on undocumented migrants and such. On the strategic side, I think on a Pakistan scenario, look, I think from India's point of view, the idea is not that the US will necessarily help India in a Pakistan scenario. In fact, it would be welcome if the US was to stay out of it. And J.D. Vance said early on May 7th that this is none of our business. I think that kind of attitude would be welcomed. The question is not stop propping up Pakistan. The one concern, though, is today, and we saw this during Operation Sindoor, is Pakistan is now deploying Chinese weapon systems. And if measures are to be taken to counter that, the question remains, how much of that can India do on its own with the military and technological capabilities it currently has? How much will it rely, not just the US, but with other partners as well? How much will it have to continue to work to ensure that sufficient countermeasures can be taken in any Pakistan-related scenario? But again, India's position is Pakistan is a problem we have to deal with on our own. India has been doing it since 1947. For the US, I think the role is more to remain to not interfere as much, and I think that is what. The fear is that might change. China is, I think, a different proposition where China certainly has a technological advantage over India. It has a resource advantage, and dealing with the China challenge, I think, will require India to invest in more partnerships. And the question is, if not the US, and until now, still there is that convergence between China and the US. Are there others who are capable of filling the gap? And again, the common thread in all of this is in some ways, if the US is to withdraw itself from the international trading system as a net importer of migrants, of immigrants, and as a strategic actor on the international stage, if the US was to play a more withdrawal regime, is there anybody else who's capable of filling that gap in various ways? And India is actively exploring that. So on trade with the EU, on some issues with Japan, on some issues, the Gulf as a source of investment, for example. You had been seeing more students going to Canada and Australia. But again, there's now a bit of a backlash in those countries as well. So I think that question will continue to come up. Are there sufficient substitutes? But ultimately, again, on all of these issues, again, perhaps this is an opportunity for India to build up its own strength. One thing that is emerging is some GCCs, these global centers in India for excellence that basically solve some of the labor issues in developed countries without the immigration related disadvantages. And I think, again, some creative solutions, whether it's in education and technology, will have to be found in some of these areas. But I think a bit more optimistic, both about the situation on the ground and how India's ability to deal with it. I feel India has dealt with much worse crises in the past and much more hostile international environment. Final proposition I would leave everyone with is Trump in some ways embodies a major contradiction in US public opinion when it comes to the US role as an international actor. If you ask average Americans, and this is borne out in public opinion surveys, should the US be the greatest country in the world? Should it be the international leader? Should it be the most powerful country in the world? It is overwhelmingly yes. Most Americans want America to be the most powerful country in the world. But if you ask them, are you willing to bear some of the costs and risks associated with that international leadership role? So would you like more immigration? Would you like more, be non-reciprocal trade arrangements with countries? Would you like a U.S. military force stationed in several countries around the world? Would you support military interventions in conflicts? The answer is overwhelmingly no on all of these issues. So on specific issues and policies, Americans don't want the US to take on more cost or risk associated with a global leadership role, but they want the benefits of being a global leader. And Trump himself actually embodies that contradiction. And that I think is something to add. He says nobody should do deals with China, but I may want to do a deal with China. And that's, I think, that is the contradiction that not just India is having to navigate, but others as well. And I just leave people with that thought.
Great, Dhruva. For Professor Mattoo, so this what we are now witnessing, and you also talked about is that we are now back to re-engaging China in some form. We also saw Indian participation in BRICS summit held in Rio. So are we now, because there is now also chatter in that sense amongst strategic community about a return of non-alignment. So how do you see that? Because that still is, I think, I don't think it's a good idea to go back to an idea which has really played out its course. How do you see that?
Let me first of all begin by agreeing with a lot of what Dhruva and Seema have said. However, the question is what, for instance, Seema pointed out was that in some ways Pakistan was, to use an Urdu word, more chalak. They were more cunning, devious. They got to Trump, and Trump's constituencies are concentric circles. Himself, his family, his constituency, electoral constituency, and then the wider concerns of the United States. And somehow, through a various degrees of lobbying, buying off cryptocurrency, promising access to critical metals, which no one is even sure whether they exist or not, that we could have done that chalaki. I don't think it's so simple. I don't think it's just a question of buying off Trump. Otherwise, as I said in one interview before all this happened, was that you should really appoint Mr. Adani and Mr. Ambani as your de facto ambassadors to the United States, and get them and say, look, this is your key performance indicator as far as your KPI for this year is we want Trump on our side. I just think that yes, Trump is transactional, he is tactical, but it's more complicated than that. Secondly, about champions. Now, what is surprising, and I do want to get Dhruva and Seema to answer that question, the traditional champions like Tulsi Gabbard or Kash Patel are people who can be fired. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is probably on a daily. I think any day she could probably be fired by Trump if he doesn't, if he sees something that worries or angers him. But the one person who can't be fired, and the only person who in recent US history, the only example of someone resigning from that position is Spiro Agnew in 1973, is J.D. Vance. Whatever happened to J.D. Vance? Why was he someone who was seen as so deeply suspicious of China, and at least engaged with India to the point that I was in Jaipur and the Vance family was enjoying themselves in Rambagh at the height of Operation Sindhur. Whatever happened to J.D. Vance? He can't be fired by Trump. Or is it that his ambitions, he realized, are so completely coalesced with Trump's ideology that any disconnect between him and Trump would reflect in his prospective electoral chances? So that's a genuine question which I want to ask. The third is, I'm not saying that there aren't better scenarios, and I hope both Dhruva and Seema are right, and that sanity prevails, that we arrive at a deal of sorts, we get access to technology. There is no doubt. America, we need America. But if we are not going to have an America who's either reliable or predictable, then what do? We focus inwards, we diversify our partners. Japan, Taiwan, they're looking for engineers, 50,000 Taiwanese, 50,000 Indian engineers and skilled and semi skilled workers are being sought by Taiwan. I think a similar number of engineers, for 50,000 skilled engineers, are being sought by Japan. In East Asia, in various other parts of the Indo Pacific, there are partners who still have an appetite for Indian human capital. Similarly, which has been extremely useful. But I'm sure there are others. So what I'm saying is that maybe this is a pause that you needed when everyone was going gung ho about the US-India relationship and there was a big high. Maybe this was the pause that we needed. Thank you.
Yes, sir. We have one. I mean, there are many questions. I'll just take only one. Yes, Shubhranshu, you can go ahead, please.
Thank you to the esteemed panel for your enlightening remarks. This is Subhrangshu, doctoral candidate in JNU. My question is pertaining only to the upcoming Quad summit that India is going to host in September. Trump has already agreed for the same, that he would be present. Considering all the things that the esteemed panel has mentioned regarding all the challenges and opportunities, how do you perceive the outcomes or the challenges in the Quad summit? How exactly India should pitch its focus? I mean, we have seen that Quad has been a priority. Well, it was the first meeting of Marco Rubio, but given whatever has happened over the past few months, how exactly are we looking at this summit? How whether it will be able to balance the China confusion? All these factors, if you can throw some light on that. Thank you.
Dhruva, you want to take on this?
Yeah, I also actually have to get off the call in a few minutes. So unfortunately, I'll answer this and then unfortunately have to jump off quickly after that. The Quad Summit is expected to happen in November of this year. India is the host. Earlier, prior to Operation Sindhu, President Trump and his staff had expressed interest in attending, and however, made it somewhat contingent upon there being a trade deal. Now, a lot has happened on the international trade front, not just with India since then. Let's see if that partly that still stands, but I think there's an expectation that there's some kind of trade deal in place by the time he comes. I think another factor, two other factors, I think, just to come in to three things. One, the Quad agenda has become a bit more focused, which is good, but also a bit more narrow, which in some cases may not be as good. But I think that there are now sort of 4 clear work streams within the Quad that the US has said that they want to prioritize and largely align with the interests of the other partners. 2 wrinkles, though. One is it is not just the India relationship that has been colored by recent developments. In fact, if anything, the US-Japan relationship and US-Australia relationships are in even more uncertain than they've been, and matter more for those countries because they have a much deeper security relationship with the US. So Australia now they're quite perturbed about this review of AUKUS by the Pentagon. We've seen Prime Minister Albanese going to China, in fact, this week, motivated again primarily by trade issues. So there is a certain dissatisfaction in Canberra with Washington as well. And meanwhile, with Japan, you saw a 2+2 meeting postponed because the US demanded that Japan commit to a higher defense spending than they thought was arranged beforehand. They've been struck by a new round of tariffs, more than India. So in some ways, I think we can focus on the differences between US and India that have emerged and how that might complicate a Quad summit. But the other actors have their own issues with Washington as well at this point of time. Finally, I think there is a concern about what happens with Pakistan. I mean, for example, if President Trump chooses to do a stopover in Pakistan on the way to India, that would, from India's point of view, be seen as a wrong signal. It would take things back to the 1990s when even President Clinton stopped for a very quick visit to Pakistan on the way to India. But subsequent to that, most leaders, including US leaders, have made it a point to try and not visit both countries at the same time. And things like that might, and other irritants involving Pakistan may emerge. So I think those all cast some question marks over the Quad summit. But as of now, preparations are underway for a meaningful and substantive meeting in November. But I think I'm raising these possibilities as things that factors that could shape the outcome. Final point, on the thing, I think we underestimate. We've talked a lot about Pakistan's role. I think we underestimate how much India does have a lot of goodwill in the Trump administration, including with Vice President Vance. I think the way it played out, though, in some ways, was he spoke to Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor. But again, the overriding logic, and again, Secretary of State Marco Rubio also is very positively disposed towards the India account as well. I think the way it played out was it was felt that it was the easy win to give the Trump administration and Trump himself at that time, and that overrode everything else. So I think again, we perhaps I don't want to risk overstating these other factors that are at play in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship at this point of time, or underplay, India's relationships with the Trump administration, which I think, we're in a very strange place where sometimes, Europeans come to Indians to say, you seem to have better relations with people high up in the Trump administration than we do. And again, it's just sort of turning things on its head. So again, I don't think things are as dire but I think you have to be realistic about what some of the consequences and the uncertainty are, and how that will play out. And then so one final thing, I think there is that question mark about say, can Indian talent find roots elsewhere? And Professor Mattoo mentioned Japan, Taiwan, and there is increased interest. But the scale is not, I was just in Japan a little while ago. These are not very immigrant-heavy societies, and particularly, so the scale that they can offer is not comparable to something that you're seeing in the US. I'd say the two exceptions to that on the immigration front, one is the European Union, particularly outside the UK. Now the UK has left the EU. We've seen an increase, for example, in Indian students to Germany and other parts of the European Union, as India has signed a series of bilateral mobility agreements with many of these countries. So that has been one place we've seen some pickup, and the other is the Gulf, where again, because there is a systemic labor shortage there, these are low population, Saudi Arabia, UAE, that you're seeing more Indians, including Indian professional workers, going to many of these places. But I think that again, on every of the issues I mentioned, trade, immigration, strategic power, the question will remain: will a depreciated U.S. role be sufficiently taken up by others? And I think that's an open question. Just doing the back of the envelope calculation suggests that in many cases it can't be. Again, the U.S. trade deficit is so huge that if they were to try to meaningfully rectify it, it's unclear whether China or the European Union or anybody else, the Global South, has enough of the purchasing power to actually help drive manufacturing in other countries. So I think these are things to ponder, which is to what degree can there be substitutes for the US? Obviously, from India's point of view, the more it can indigenize, the more it can diversify, the better. But it's something to leave people with. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have run out of time. Thank you, Dhruva, Seema, and Professor Mattoo for really sharing extremely illuminating remarks, and really at some level, I think the fog has been cleared in some ways, and looking forward to host you again at some point. So thank you very much for coming joining us today morning, obviously here in India, in the US, and evening in Delhi. So looking forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.